Thank you for listening to the 8-Minute Devotion. We trust you've been encouraged and blessed today. Please subscribe to the podcast is a daily message that exists to give you hope, encouragement, and life as we look together at the Word of God. And now, the8minutedevotion@gmail.com or visit our Facebook page. We would love to hear from you.
Well, hello, friends, and welcome back one last time this week to the 8-Minute Devotion. This is our Friday episode, and we are looking at the heroes of faith from Hebrews 11. We've spent the last several episodes on the life of Abraham, and today actually is our last episode on Abraham before we move on to different heroes of faith. Next week, Hebrews 11 has a lot to say about Abraham, so we've been spending a lot of time looking at him. So right now, we're looking at this part of Abraham's life, what we're calling the obedience of faith, how through faith, Abraham offered Isaac, his only son, as a sacrifice to God. He was willing to offer Isaac until, of course, God stopped him at the last moment, and we're going to read the last scripture that describes this in Hebrews 11 today. We've read verse 17 and 18 the last couple days. Today we're going to read Hebrews 11 and verse 19. And it says here, he, Abraham, considered that God was able even to raise him from the dead, from which, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back. And in other words, what this scripture is telling us is that when Abraham was about to offer Isaac, Abraham knew all of God's promises are tied up in my son Isaac. Everything God has promised me, my whole travail for the 25 years of waiting for Isaac to be born, everything I've been looking for, it's all tied up in Isaac. It's all waiting in Isaac, and I'm about to sacrifice him. I'm about to have to put the knife to my own son. But it says that Abraham had such faith in God that even as he was about to do this extraordinarily painful act, even as he was about to do this thing he never wanted to do, never imagined he would have to do, that he considered that God was even able to raise Isaac from the dead. Abraham was thinking, even if I do this, my God is able to raise Isaac from the dead. My God, even if I make this action and I put my dreams to death, my God is able to bring my dreams back to life. He is more than able. Now, that's a ludicrous thought to have, of course, from a natural point of thinking. When you put a knife through someone, they die. And when they die, they don't come back. When have you ever seen that? We might say, oh, that was a long time ago. They didn't know science. Look, they may not have had all the science we have today, but one thing they understood very clearly is that dead is dead, and that dead people do not come back to life. Everyone knew that. Even, 4,000 years, 3,500 years ago when Abraham was living, everybody knew that dead people stay dead. They don't come back to life. But Abraham had such faith that he knew, even if I do put this knife through Isaac, even if I have to kill my son, the most painful thing imaginable, God is more than able to bring him back to life. And what faith Abraham had, and what an inspiration it is for us, that whatever God has called us to, that whatever difficulties we go through, whatever challenges we have in the life of faith, God is more than able to bring about the answer. God is more than able to bring about the miracle. God is more than able, even when every sign is pointing against us, God is more than able to bring the miracle that we're waiting for, to do the thing that we have been calling out to him for. God is always able. So my brothers and sisters, many of you listening today, God has given you promises. God has given you great promises. He's promised you blessings in your family. He's promised you healings in your body. He's promised you a ministry that I'll send you to this place, or I'll do this in your church, or I'll multiply you in this way and that way. God has given you promises. But yet for many of you, it seems that the promises have not come to pass. It seems like everything has gone in the wrong direction. Maybe even after giving the promises, it has seemed to you like the very opposite has happened. And the thing God has spoken, instead you've had to give up this and give up that in the path of obedience. And it just seems like it can't happen. But my brother and sister, today I want to remind you, God can bring those promises back to life. God can bring them back to life. The scripture says Abraham considered that God was able to raise Isaac from the dead. And then the scripture explains, figuratively speaking, he did receive him back because Isaac did not die. Isaac was his life was retained, his life was given back to Abraham. Abraham received his son, and every promise did come to pass. Isaac gave birth to Esau and Jacob. From Jacob, his name was changed to Israel. The 12 sons of Israel were born, and then, of course, the nation of Israel was brought forth. Everything Abraham was promised. He obeyed God. He sacrificed it all, and then it all was given back to him. You know, I remember a story my wife often tells. My wife, the lovely and talented Delia, and she tells a story that when she and I when we were getting to know each other, we had met in Singapore, and for a couple of years after that, we just emailed each other. Truth is, we were both interested in each other, but I hadn't told her how I felt. Of course, she didn't tell me how she felt. I was praying and waiting on God, and for that whole period, that 2-year period, she was waiting and hoping that I would make a move and tell her how I felt. And God, what happened was this: a few months before I finally told her, hey, I'm interested, do you want to get to know each other better and see what God will do? God spoke to her and said, Cameron is the one for you. Wait for Cameron. It was actually in the context. There were some other people visiting her church and her youth ministry, and people were telling her, hey, you should consider this guy. You should consider going out with him. He's a really great guy. And, she prayed about it, and God told her, no, do not go out with that guy. Wait for Cameron. He's the one that I have for you. And God gave her that promise a few months before I spoke to her and let her know how I felt. But a couple months later, what happened? She responded to an altar call, and God spoke to her and said, you must give everything up. You must give up your dream of marrying Cameron. You must give up your dream of being with Cameron. You must be willing to be single the rest of your life. And at that altar, she had a choice to make. Would she give up that promise? She thought God had promised her a relationship with me. Now God's calling her to give it up. What should she do? She chose to obey God, and she said, God, I give it up. God, I am willing to be single the rest of my life. I'm willing to give up that promise. And you know what happened? A couple months later, I spoke to her. A couple months later, I told her how we felt. A couple months after that, we were in a relationship. And just a few months after that, we were engaged and we got married. It all happened very quick. But before God gave her the fulfillment of the promise, she had to be willing to give up the promise. And I'm glad she was, because I ended up with the world's most wonderful wife, because she was willing to go through that process. You see, that's how it is many times in God's kingdom. We have to be willing to give up the promise, to obey God. But when we're willing to obey, God will see that in his perfect time, every promise does come to pass. Be willing to go through the obedience of faith. Abraham obeyed God, and he received everything God had promised him. It will be the same for you. As you walk down the path of obedience, every single promise will come to pass. Not because you deserve it, but because God is a good God and he's looking for obedient people. Thank you for listening to these episodes on Abraham. We'll be back next week with more Heroes of Faith on the 8-Minute Devotion.